A poor family bought a doll for their little girl, but after she died, the doll didn't stay still. Its hair kept growing, it started moving on its own, and one night it came back, knocking on the door. In Japan, sometime in the 1980s, a real incident unfolded, one so disturbing that the family who lived through it was never the same again. It began, as many tragedies do, with love. Simple, pure, sibling love. Iki Suzuki was 17 years old. His little sister, Kikuko-chan, was about to turn 4. Their family lived modestly in a quiet corner of Japan. Their father took whatever labor work he could find each day, and their mother stayed home doing sewing work late into the night. Money was always tight, and luxuries were rare, but within those 4 walls, there was genuine warmth, and at the center of it was little Kikuko, bright-eyed, loud with laughter, and endlessly curious about the world around her. That year, Kikuko had one wish. She wanted a doll, not just any doll, a beautiful one that could be her best friend, her constant companion. She asked her parents earnestly, and though it hurt them to do it, they had to say no. There simply wasn't enough money. But Iki had heard her ask, and he couldn't stand the thought of her birthday passing without that one wish coming true. So for an entire month, he quietly took on small odd jobs around the neighborhood, sweeping, carrying, running errands, saving every coin without telling anyone. When he finally had enough, he went to the market and began searching. He passed stall after stall. Nothing felt right. Then, through the glass of a shop window, he saw it. The doll stood apart from all the others. It wore a traditional red kimono, richly colored and carefully stitched. Its black hair was straight, cut neatly to the neck. But what made Iki stop were the eyes, calm and deep, as though they weren't simply painted on, but were actually watching, taking in everything around them with quiet attention. Something about it felt unusual, but it was beautiful, and he thought of his sister's face when she would unwrap it. He bought the doll and brought it home. On her birth, Kikuko tore open the wrapping, froze for just a moment, and then erupted into pure joy. She held the doll up, turned it carefully in her small hands, and smiled the kind of smile that fills an entire room. She chose the most special spot in her room for it, and that same night slept with it cradled tightly against her chest. She named it Okiku. From that day forward, the doll went everywhere. Kikuko combed its hair with great care, pretended to bathe it, whispered things to it, and tucked it in beside her every night. For a short while, the house felt like the happiest place on earth. Then, one afternoon while playing outside, Kikuko was bitten by a mosquito. Within days, she was gravely ill. The diagnosis was malaria. The family gathered around her helplessly, watching the color drain from her face as the days passed. In her final hours, as her breathing grew shallow, Kikuko reached out and pulled the Okiku doll tightly to her chest. And then, she was gone. The grief that moved through that house was the kind that permanently changes people. In Japanese tradition, the dead are cremated alongside their most beloved possession, a way of sending them forward with the things that gave them comfort. The family wanted to cremate Okiku alongside Kikuko. It felt right. It felt necessary, but the temple refused permission. So instead, the family placed the doll on a shelf in their home, a quiet memorial, a way of keeping some small piece of Kikuko alive in the house where she had laughed and grown. That was where the real story began. A few nights after the funeral, Iki was lying in his room when a sound drifted in from the hallway. Faint, soft, so faint he almost dismissed it. But he lay still and listened, and slowly understood what he was hearing. It sounded like Kikuko's voice, the exact rhythm and pitch of her, murmuring and laughing the way she used to when she played alone on the floor. He got up and walked toward it. The sounds continued just around the next corner. Then, the moment he stepped into the main room, they stopped. The hallway was empty. The house was perfectly still. He told himself it was grief. He went back to bed. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that, until days had passed and his parents began hearing it too. The soft voice of a child, always coming from a room that was empty every time they checked. Then one evening, Iki came home to find his bedroom disturbed. Kikuko's drawings, carefully stored away after her death, were scattered across his floor. The Okiku doll lay among them, on its side, facing the doorway. Every window in the house was latched shut. No one had been home all day. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring. Then he looked more carefully at the doll. Its hair, which had always been cut neatly to the neck, now clearly reached the shoulders. He pressed his memory against what he was seeing. He was not mistaken, and the texture had changed too. No longer the smooth, uniform black of synthetic doll hair, but slightly brown at the tips, softer, and beginning to develop split ends, the way human hair does after months of natural growth. When he showed his parents, his mother picked up a pair of scissors without much discussion and trimmed the hair back to its original length, neat and even at the neck. Then she set the doll back on her shelf and said nothing more about it. That night, she could not fall asleep. When exhaustion finally took her, the dream came immediately. Kikuko was standing before her, crying with the full, shaking grief of a heartbroken child. Through her tears, she told her mother that her hair had been cut. Her voice trembled with it the way only a small child's can. The mother reached for her, wanting to comfort her. But Kikuko's tone slowly changed. The trembling stopped. The tears dried. And her face gradually and horribly began to shift, the soft features of a 4-year-old hardening, the eyes going flat and still, until what stood there was no longer her daughter. It was the Okiku doll. The mother woke up screaming and felt the weight of something sitting on her chest. She thrashed backwards, screaming again. Iki and his father ran in. They found her alone, pressed against the headboard, arms out in front of her. The bed was empty. The doll sat quietly on its shelf in the hallway, exactly where it always was, facing forward with its hands in its lap. After that night, the nightmares came for all 3 of them. Each family member, on separate nights, dreamt of the same presence, the doll, moving towards them with that calm, expressionless face. The feeling running through each dream was identical, something cold and deliberate that had made a decision about them. Sleep became something they feared. The house felt permanently watched. Shadows gathered low in corners, child-shaped, disappearing the moment you looked directly at them. And the doll's hair kept growing. No matter how often they trimmed it, within days it had lengthened again. One evening, Iki was passing through the room when something made him slow his pace. He stopped and turned to look at the doll directly. Its head was turned toward him. He was completely certain it had been facing forward. He had walked past it an hour ago. It had been facing forward then too. He stood very still, staring. His heart was loud in his ears. And then the doll blinked. After that, the activity in the house intensified rapidly. Small shadows appeared in corners and along the walls. Objects were found displaced. The sounds at night grew louder. The feeling of being watched followed them even outdoors in broad daylight. Iki's father made the decision. The doll had to go. He carried it out to a field nearby, dug a hole, lowered the doll inside, and packed the earth firmly down over it. He walked home without looking back. The family locked the doors and tried to sleep. They were all awake before midnight. Something was pounding on the front door. Not knocking, pounding. A heavy, desperate force that shook the frame and sent vibrations through the floor underfoot. Beneath it, threading through the sound like a voice through water, was a child crying, calling their names one by one in a voice that belonged to Kikuko. The pounding grew harder. Dishes rattled in the kitchen. The ceiling light swung. The walls seemed to tremble with it. Then it stopped. Total silence. The 3 of them sat unmoving in the dark. After a long stillness, Iki's father stood, crossed the room, and opened the front door. The Okiku doll was standing on the doorstep, not lying, not propped, standing upright, facing into the house, looking directly at him. Before he could react, the doll's hair began to move. It spread and lengthened in real time, wrapping itself around his throat. He grabbed at it, but there was nothing solid to grip. The hair tightened. He dropped to his knees, gasping, his face reddening. His hands clawed at his neck. Iki and his mother pulled at the hair, tried to tear it away. Nothing worked. His father's eyes were wide and desperate, his body heaving for air. In pure desperation, with nothing left, Iki turned toward the doll and shouted his sister's name, Kikuko! The doll went still. The hair fell loose. His father collapsed forward onto the doorstep, gasping in long, ragged breaths. They pulled him inside and held him there until his breathing steadied and color returned to his face. No one spoke, no one slept. They tried to get rid of the doll again after that, several times in several ways, driving it far across the city, leaving it at another temple, abandoning it in the countryside. Each time it came back, by means they could never account for. It returned to its shelf, as though it had simply decided to come home, and no distance or lock or effort could change that. This continued for 20 years. Every year as the calendar approached Kikuko's birthday, the activity grew sharper, sounds louder, dreams more vivid, shadows more defined. Priests were brought in. Monks performed cleansing rituals and burned incense and recited sutras. None of it had any lasting effect. More than once, things grew noticeably worse in the days directly following a cleansing, as if whatever occupied the doll was responding to each attempt with something close to displeasure. The family aged inside that house, carrying 2 decades of disrupted sleep and unrelenting fear, alongside a grief that had never been allowed to quietly settle. Finally, they made the only decision left. They packed their things and left. They brought the doll to a Buddhist temple in Japan and placed it in the care of the monks, explaining as much as they could. The monks accepted it and performed their own purification rites. Nothing worked. That was close to 100 years ago. The doll remains in that temple today, carefully preserved. Visitors may see it, but photography is strictly forbidden. Those who have stood before it for too long describe a deep unease they cannot explain, sometimes followed by disturbing dreams in the nights after their visit. The hair continues to grow. The monks trim it regularly, not with ceremony, but as a routine task, a simple fact of maintaining the doll. But recently, those who tend to it most closely have noticed something new. The doll's mouth appears to be slowly opening, not all at once, incrementally over years in measurements too small to catch unless you compare it to photographs taken long ago. And some of the monks say that if you look closely enough, if you lean in and look carefully at that parted porcelain mouth, you can see the faint outline of teeth beginning to form inside. Whether it is Kikuko's spirit, a 4-year-old girl who loved her doll so deeply she refused to leave it behind, or something older and darker that found its way into that painted face, no one who tends to the temple will say. The doll sits in its glass case. Its red kimono has not faded. Its hair, freshly trimmed, rests at the neck, exactly as it did the day Iki first brought it home for his little sister, and its mouth, slowly and without hurry, continues to open.